and you built your own studio, didn't you, with your own bare hands, which is pretty incredible for your first solo record, Flexible. I mean, that's an incredible thing to do in terms of crafting your building as well.
Yeah, that was a dream come true. The fascinations when sometimes you don't recognize these things till later in life, but the real fascination for me in my career, since you have a kind of some periods of time to look back at, I always lit up first and foremost with the idea of composing, writing music. I wanted to understand that language since I was 5 years old. I wanted to own it, and I wanted to be able to wield it. And then after that, oddly enough, it was recording, because I understood it's 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I understood the concept of recording, but there was something about the process that fascinated me in my mind. And of course, there was the fascination with the guitar, but I didn't consider playing the guitar because it seemed so out of my reach. It was such there was so much of a mystique to it. It stunned me every time I would look at a guitar. So it always seemed like, well, you're not good enough for that.
Wow.
But then when my sister came home with Led Zeppelin 2, and I heard that record, especially Heartbreaker, and when I was about 11 or 12, that was it. I had to play the guitar. And then, as fate would have it, my friend sold me a guitar he had for $5, and that kicked things off for me. But obviously, my perspective of recording was greatly enhanced once I started working with Frank, and I was I would watch him very carefully. He showed me how to edit tape. Once I learned how to edit tape, that was it. The first thing I bought when I had any money was a 4-track TIAC 4-track tape recorder, and I just recorded everything. And it was in a little apartment in Fairfax down in Hollywood. But then right after Frank, that's when I built Stucco Blue. And I had just saved enough to put a down payment on a house in Sylmar. And there was a tool shed out back. And I basically, built it out. And it took me 5 months, and it was great fun because I liked building too. Yeah. And then I started to record Flexible.
Incredible.
And then Passion and Warfare. Some of Passion and Warfare was recorded there, and some of Alcatrazz, and some of Dave Roth.
Wow.
Skyscraper. Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's incredible. In terms of Flexible, then, I mean, you released that on your own record label. You started your own record label instead of signing a crap deal with a standard company. I mean, that's a pretty bold move, again, for someone who's fairly young, who didn't have a big back catalogue behind them. How did you come to that decision? And did you ask friends in the business for advice and that kind of thing around that?
I had no real expectations, and the idea of recording a record, I knew I wanted to record. I was recording tons and tons of nonstop recording. But the idea of releasing it and trying to get a record deal and release it, I just didn't want to deal with it. I just didn't want to go out and, would you release my record? No, please. It's just, the music seemed too personal I didn't want to be subjected to anybody else's decision about anything. I just felt in a position of vulnerability if I had to depend on a record company, so, and I was so young and naive. I wasn't desperate at all. I had no desperation to be famous or successful. I just wanted to play the guitar and record these crazy melodies and songs. And the idea of like writing music, recording it, and listening to it, that was enough, but then I had all this material, and I had Flexible, and I thought, I wonder if I could, get this printed up so I could send it to some friends. And that's when the Evatone Flexi disc came into my life. And that's just like one of those little plastic, flimsy,
bendy one.
And there was a company called Evatone, and they made them. And I thought, well, I know, I'll be the first one to release a record on an Evatone Flexi disc. And I started to look into it, and there was a lot of limitations to it. And then I thought, well, what the heck? Let me try to see if somebody will release this. And I started shopping it around. And there was one label, Enigma, and they were willing to release it. And the only reason they were willing to release it was because I was an ex-Zappa musician. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I ended up getting a deal from them. And when I read the deal, I was just stunned. It was like a $10,000 advance, and they would own the record, and they'd give me 25 cents a record. And I had to recoup the $10,000 advance from my 25 cents.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. They see, they saw me coming, some stupid kid. And I took it to my attorney, and he said, no, Steve, this is a conventional record deal, and this is a good one. They're offering you an advance. Most people in your position, they wouldn't offer an advance. I said, yeah, but then they own my record. And goes, yeah, that's what they do. This is, and 25 cents. He goes, yeah. And I said, fuck that. And I just said no. And because it didn't feel right to me, like I'm not going to. Why should they get so much more? There's always been another kind of stumbling block in me. And it was always on an economic level. I could never understand why anybody would get paid more than me for my work. And they never have, not in my career. I've always made sure that managers, agents, anybody, I get paid the most, the end. And if it doesn't work out that way, I just don't do it, because it's something, it makes sense. Now, of course, there may be situations where there's a lot of other people involved, and my desire for that, for getting paid the most for my work is that of fairness. Mm-hmm. Because it's my work. And so many situations are different where, of course, you're splitting something and you're co-creating and things like that. But when it came time to record companies and things like that, I just thought I just didn't want to be taken advantage of. So I did something kind of outrageous. I decided to start my own label. I was 22 years old, because I just started to look behind the curtain, and I'm thinking, well, how do labels work? And the only thing we had to go by back then was like the yellow pages. There was no internet, there was no computers, nothing. But we figured it out. And I noticed that labels support, they have a great function. They pay for everything, and they give you the money to make the records, and then they take the record and it becomes part of their equity, because labels run great risks, and that's how they build their equity, by owning the masters. But I eventually, and then what they do is they manufacture the records, and these were all vinyl back then, and some cassettes. They manufacture the records, and then they sell the records to a distributor. And the distributor puts it in the stores. The distributor goes around to all the stores and says, hey, you want to buy the... So that was something I learned, and I just thought, well, why don't I go to distributors instead of labels? And I did. And every distributor I called would say, no, we don't take product from artists. We take product from labels. So I started a little label. It cost me $12.50.
Oh, brilliant.
I just went downtown, filed the paper, and, had this little label. It was nothing. You know, it was an envelope, but the envelope had flexible in it, you know, and I found a distributor that was willing to release it because he was a guitar head, Cliff Coltrane at Important Records. And he offered me $4.10 a record, and I retained the rights to the record. Nobody was taking it. And I said, "Oh yeah, you know." And he took 1,000, and that was a lot of money to me, you know, $4,000. And then he took another 1,000, and then another 1,000, and then another 1,000. Then the Attitude song got into Guitar Player magazine, and that was it. I mean, now he's taking 10,000, you know. And then the record was distributed through their partner overseas. So, and then when CDs came out, I retained the same kind of distribution deal. So instead of getting on a good conventional deal, 50 cents a record, a CD from a label, I was getting $7.50.
Wow.
Yeah. And within a period of years, it sold like 400,000 copies.
Wow.
So that was crazy. It was just such a windfall. And I never really, I mean, I like money, but not, it never really, I was never one of these guys that went out and bought a lot of things, except musical gear. The one thing I always kind of would spend on is a studio. I always had a studio, but, and I never really was into, I never did drugs or waste my money on cars. And, if you like cars, that's great, but I didn't have any attraction. You know, I just wanted to play my guitar and record. And that's what I did.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Fascinating stories.
Listen, I want to just mention, I know it sounds like I'm bragging, but the reason I'm telling this story the way it is that young musicians need to understand their independence, and they need to know that they are the boss of them. You know, and that you never need to allow anybody to take advantage of you. And your best weapon is information. Your best defense is to understand how things work. And it's not hard. It's really, it just takes a little bit of looking into, because artists have different kinds of brain muscles than business people. Artists are fascinated with notes, and business people are fascinated with dollars, you know, and that's fine. You need both, or they're fascinated with numbers, you know, and it's good to have both. But all too many times I see the stories of people who got banged, artists that got banged through their career. And sometimes they believe they did, but they actually didn't, because they just didn't understand how some of the numbers work. So the reason I'm even telling this story, I made a lot of mistakes in the business. I made my share of mistakes for sure. And I learned from them. But it's important to just do a little homework to understand what is the equity of a musician. Mm-hmm. You know, like what, because you got to keep things balanced. It's nice. You could live very simply. I always just lived below my means a little bit. So if I was making, you know, $200 a week giving guitar lessons, I figured out how to live on $180 a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I always thought that was important, and that's why I share the story.